Hi, my name is Tomasz and you're watching Casual DIY channel. In today's video I will show you how to mix your epoxy correctly so you will not have any curing problems and your casting will come out perfect. So stay tuned. Okay then, so I'm guessing you're absolutely new to working with any resin whatsoever, or you had some issues with curing. Well, let's talk about a few basic things before we actually start mixing the resin itself. There are a lot, and I mean a lot of varieties when it comes to resin. And I actually covered that in one of my videos, which I'm going to link up above in the cards and down below in the description of this video. That will give you an indication on more or less which resin to choose to and what are the properties of different resins. So if you're not sure and you want to find out, check out that video because it's definitely worth it, and obviously then come back to this one. So the biggest mistake that everybody do at the start, and to be fair I've done it 3 times, so there you go, is basically not reading the technical sheet that comes with your resin. As I mentioned before, every resin is different and it needs a different approach. So basically we are talking about 2-part epoxy, when part A is the epoxy itself and part B is the hardener. And the first absolutely crucial thing to note is the mixing ratio. Now I've done this mistake, whereas okay, it's 1:1, fine, and I'm just mixing 100 grams of resin, 100 grams of hardener, and off I go. Well, not exactly, because actually that resin was 1:1 by volume and not weight. Hence my resin didn't cure correctly. So it's very important to check if your resin is a ratio of 1:1 or whatever it may be by volume, which is basically amounts of resin, or by weight. And if you've got one where actually you're mixing in the ratios with weights, you're gonna need a very accurate scale. Now, depending if you're mixing large volumes or small volumes, that will indicate what scale you need. So for example, if you're casting jewelry and you're not using much epoxy, it's actually very important to get a very accurate scale. Mine is actually 0.01 gram to start with, and it goes right up to 500 grams. Okay, so we've got one of the basics covered. The next thing is actually the ambient temperature. Most of the resins you're going to be working with will require an ambient temperature that will allow it to cure correctly. And in most cases is between 20 to 25 degrees Celsius. I've got no idea how much that's in Fahrenheit, so if anybody knows, drop a comment down below for everybody else to find out. So why is this important? Well, basically, you are combining 2 chemicals together. When they combine together, their chemical reaction starts and it releases heat. So basically it transforms into a thermoactive chemical where it produces heat, and by producing heat it actually cures. So if it's too cold, it basically may not cure and will remain sticky. Whereas when it's really hot, the reaction will be sped up too much and the casting may come out with some cracks in it, or again may not cure correctly. So as you can see, that's another important tip. So basically I've got the temperature reading of the ambient plus humidity. Now that's another one. So humidity, why is that important? Some of the resins, like for example polyurethane resins, are not very good with moisture. So the chances are the higher the humidity in a workshop or an environment, the resin may not actually cure correctly either. So it's important to actually select the right resin for your environment and ambient temperature and humidity as well. So as you can see, it's not a simple topic. But that's not all. An important thing is actually the containers itself in which you're going to be mixing the resin itself. So as we mentioned before, the amount of hardener and the resin, they have to be really accurate. Now, depending on what container you're using, you may actually shoot yourself in the foot. So basically I'm going to show you a couple of examples. So you think to yourself, tell you what, I'm going to nip down to my local Tesco or whatever, I'm going to buy some of these plastic drink cups you can get, which is fine, you can use them, fantastic. But what you have to be careful of, the bottoms of them are not always straight. And for example, this one has got some notches sticking out and a groove inside. So as you can see, if you're gonna pour some resin in there, it will actually be very difficult to mix it. So that's one of the points that we have to be careful of. So the best solution is to get a container like this one with a flat bottom. Then you're definitely not going to miss any resin, and none of the resin will be hidden away in any of the notches of the container itself. But there's another issue. So if your resin is by weight, which is fine, you get your scales, measure it up, off you go. But if it's by volume, well, it gets a little bit tricky. You basically need to mix a certain amount. If it's 1:1, it's not too bad. You get 2 containers, mix it together. But for example, if it's 1:5 or 1:6 or whatever it may be, it's then very difficult to actually measure those on the cups, because most of the times, their cups are not straight. They're actually leaning outwards. That's meaning you're gonna have less resin at the bottom, but in the same like centimeter up, you're gonna have more resin. So you have to be careful with that. Hence, some very smart people developed these. So basically, you've got all the ratios highlighted on these cups. You got also milliliters, so ratio 1:1, 1:6, 1:4, everything, and it does say part A, part B, so you can clearly know what is what and how much you need to pour. But obviously, they are not the cheapest. You can get smaller ones, smaller versions like this one, and obviously bigger ones, depending on what you need and what you actually are casting. But in most cases, if you're going to mix your resin in something like this, some of these are actually not reusable, and basically you have to throw them away after your mixing process, which is not very good. But fortunately enough, some smart people made some silicone cups with the measures as well. But most of the cases you're actually gonna get up to 100 milliliters, and to be fair, I don't recommend mixing 100 mils in that, because it's just impossible to mix together. But they're actually perfect for smaller amounts, up to 50, 60 or even probably 80, and it's pouring from them is quite easy as well, because obviously they're flexible and easy to use. And now at this point you're probably thinking, come on, this video is probably already 10 minutes long, surely we can start mixing and that's enough. Well, not exactly. Another thing that's fairly important when you're actually mixing your resin is what you're mixing it with. So I've got this large wooden popsicle. Now some people will say they're actually not perfect for mixing resin, because they will introduce additional amounts of air into your mixture of resin. I don't think they will add that much, and to be fair, I use them all the time and I can't see much of a difference between a wooden one or a plastic one. But what is actually important is the shape of those. So you've got a nice flat bottom cup, and you've got this round-ended popsicle stick. Now, if you're mixing like this, I hope you can see that, you're actually gonna miss the corners. So the technique of mixing is actually very important, because you need to get to every single nook and cranny in that container. So finally, it's now time to mix. So in this case, I'm using Glass Cast 10. So this resin actually tells you straight away on the box the mixing ratio. And it actually tells you by volume, 100 to 50, and by weight, 100 to 45. So basically, you're going to have 100 milliliters of resin, 50 milliliters of hardener, and 100 grams of resin and 45 grams of hardener. Fantastic help to anybody that's starting out casting resin. Really recommend this one. But if you are a beginner and you're still not sure what resin to choose, go for epoxy resins with long curing times, with long working times. So basically they will start setting after 30 or 40 minutes. So it's a large window for you to be able to mix it correctly, add your powders, add your pigments, add your dyes or anything else, and you won't have to stress about it. So obviously I do recommend glass cast, is very good. But another resin that's really worth mentioning is the amazing clear cast from Alumilite. Again, that Basics got a really large open window, about 45 minutes. It's easy to use and it's not too expensive either. So both of these resins would be fantastic for anybody that's starting their adventure with the resins. And basically they don't have all the hazardous things that go with other resins. These don't really smell, you don't have to use a respirator, and they're not as toxic. And even the amazing clear cast, actually it's FDA approved, and after 7 days of curing it's basically safe to get in contact with food. So I do recommend these two types of resins for you, but obviously each country is different and there are so many other brands of resins out there. So again, I have to stress this really hardly, that please read the technical sheet that comes with your resin, because that will give you all the information that you actually need. But let's start pouring the resin. I'm going to pour 100 milliliters of the resin in this cup, and I'm going to put 50 milliliters of the hardener in this one, and I'm going to transfer it to this cup and mix it all together. And at this stage it would be a good idea to put some gloves. Make sure that all the resin and all the hardener goes into the main cup. If you've got a slow setting resin, don't rush, do it correctly. And now the hardener. So if you don't want to introduce too much air bubbles into your resin, then obviously mix slowly. As you can see, I'm hoping you can see this, you've got some swivels inside. That indicates the resin is not mixed. That haze needs to fully disappear. So depending on your resin, you have to be mixing for around 2 to 3 minutes, making sure all the edges, you scrape all the walls, making sure to get to all the corners of your container and mix it correctly. Often change sides. This step is absolutely crucial for your casting to be successful. Make sure to scrape the bottom of the container at all its size. And finally, as you can see, my resin is crystal clear, the haze is gone, and there's only a slight amount of tiny air bubbles. So as you've seen, the process is fairly simple really when you follow all these steps. But I have to say, even if you follow all of them, sometimes the casting is just not going to work, and it sometimes will not come out the way you want. I have to say, resin casting, it is a fairly expensive hobby and it's quite easy to make mistakes. So preparation is the key. So arm yourself with knowledge before you make the leap and before you get discouraged by bad results. So this video is actually part 2 in my series about epoxy. There was in total 9 in this series, and if you haven't seen number 1, I was talking about different types of resin and which one may be suitable for you, for your needs. So if you're not a subscriber, please consider subscribing, because the other videos will be coming out every Tuesday. But if you want all the knowledge straight away, you can actually join my Patreon page, be my supporter, support the channel and what I do, and get access to all those videos straight away on day 1. The link to my Patreon account is down below, so if you decide to support me, thank you very much for doing so. If you've got any questions or topics you want me to cover in my future videos, please let me know down below in the comments. But also check out the description of this video, as the list of the videos that are coming out in the following weeks is actually there, and the topics are there, so you can check it out if that topic is covered and when you can actually basically expect it to be online. But for now, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope this video was of some value to you and you find out some important things. But obviously I am not all-knowing and I'm still learning, and I think it's a long journey with epoxy, to be absolutely honest with you. So if you've got any tips for me or anybody else in this community, please drop a comment down below. That would be greatly appreciated. But for now, thank you so much for watching, and see you next week on my next epoxy adventure.